Hey gang, it's KR King of D&D Homebrew, and today I'm going to show you how to make temples an integral part of your homebrewed world without too much effort. And this will help your players realize how important temples are in terms of bonding the various cultures of humanoids that you develop, and give them a sense of their own place within this world, which will give them investment in your world. The thing is, you don't want them just to be murder hobos wandering the countryside killing things, or just mercenaries out for, treasure and magic items and the next level. Because temples and the powers of the god are the glue that holds an RPG environment together. And this should be reflected in the temples that you create, whether it's some massive structure at the center of some great city or a simple shrine out in the middle of nowhere. So the key concept to think about here is that gods in an RPG fantasy setting, which is what I operate in, have a different real-world impact than they do in the real world, which means that the behavior and the traditions of the sentient creatures of your world should reflect this reality. Now, obviously, people who worship at a religious place in the real world, they believe, right? And that faith helps them through all sorts of travails of life. But very few think that some high-level, very experienced religious figure could bring back someone who's been dead for 2 or 3 days. Nor do people think that, if some person goes into a place of worship and commits some egregious crime, they're just going to be struck dead by a lightning bolt or whatever. But in an RPG setting, both of these things can and do occur, and the humanoids that live in that world know they do. So a temple enshrined to a god who has real-world temporal power is going to be a place respected and feared by any sentient creature with intelligence. The other key concept to think about here is I like to have the architecture of the temples of my world reflect the gods to which they are dedicated. And since in the homebrewed societies of my world, I allow the worship of any deities that are good or neutral, you have a lot of opportunities for temples. And then there are evil temples in an evil city, or they are hidden away in places where they're forbidden, or they're out in some remote area. And so the structure of those places, the forbidden temples, will reflect this status. And this reflects that, evil in some part is an ethos that's not accepted by general society, but the other part of this evil is, cruelty for its own sake, the dominance of the strong over the weak. Life is just a transactional process. Of course, you can create any sort of, religious ethos or culture that you want. I've just found that this sort of works best for me. Now, I'm not going to talk about whether or not you should create a pantheon for your gods. I already did this in an earlier video. I'll put a link up to that here. For this example, I'm just going to use the gods of the Greyhawk pantheon that you see in the player's handbook. But here's a little pro tip for you. If you want, you can take that exact pantheon and then just give them names that you create. And now you've got your own set of gods that are brand stinking new. The other thing that I always do as I'm starting off is to create a common or general religion, the one that is the majority of people worship. For this example, in Greyhawk pantheon, I'm just going to use Pelor, who's the god of healing and just kind of the good things about society. So this will be the religion, the god that is worshipped by almost all the common folk. And so these would be the temples that are the most common in my world. They're going to be in virtually every city, town or village, even hamlets, maybe structures, but also maybe just shrines in different places. So when I'm thinking about Pelor as my dominant religion, and I think about the architecture of these temples, I'm thinking that they're going to be humble and sort of open. They're going to be like a courtyard with several fountains, and all the people in the town or city can come to these fountains and draw water from them. The structures itself, you might have a major structure where, the priests and everything live and they hold ceremonies or whatever, but again, unadorned. It doesn't have to be fancy or, ritzy, because this is going to reflect the ethos of this god, which is service and renewal, simplicity. You might have gardens all around this courtyard and whatnot that emphasize that as well, and low walls around the easy access. Now, the main building where they live would be a place where the powerful of a city come because, having the vast majority of the residents of the city worship this god means the priests of Pelor here have power, and they're going to be courted by these people. Now, you might say, well, then this structure should be this fortified keep that such if there's a problem or something, the priests can gather everyone in, sort of like the keep, a traditional castle keep. But I don't know about that. Because you know something, this temple structure has something that, however well fortified, no keep can possibly have, and that's the protection of Pelor herself. Now, I'm not saying that any, transgressor that dares just enter this courtyard or this building uninvited is just immediately struck down. That's not how it works. But there is a perception that it could happen. And think about Thomas Becket, who was famously assassinated by 4 knights at the behest of King Henry in the Canterbury Cathedral. And part of the outrage at the brutal murder of this priest, beloved priest, was it was done in a place of God. And, whatever Henry's feelings afterwards, it was clear that the general populace was cursing these knights such that the Pope sent them to the Holy Land for a 14-year penance of fighting, and none of them ever returned. So you have this sense of tradition and this sense of, don't mess with this place, it's a sacred place. But the other thing is the clerics at an RPG temple are not just, meek little monks transcribing manuscripts, right? They have abilities. So in the main, big city of my current 5e campaign that I'm running, the Pelor Temple, it's got this courtyard set up and everything and some gardens. The main structure, it's large, but it's not super fortified. The walls are very low. It has big doors that are always open. Well, the main high priest is a 12th level light priest. And, check out the stats on a 12th level light priest in 5e. And she has 2 8th level clerics that are her assistants. And then she has a fanatical group of warriors. And then she has an 8th level Oath of the Ancients paladins that runs this. So this priestess is like, do you want to mess with me? Come on in. My doors are open to all. And the thing about this in a campaign setting, let's say that some massive evil horde overruns the main city and they threaten this temple. And you have a player character, let's say, who's a PC. Maybe it'd be an NPC, but it's more fun with a player character. And, overwhelmed and everything. And this player character raises their sword and calls upon Pelor for a final strike. I shall sacrifice myself. Are you as a GM going to be able to resist that? I don't think so. And this is the thing, this humble and very simple architecture actually serves to emphasize, the power of this patriarch and her flock. She doesn't need to impress. And likewise, if you have in some evil city, some temple dedicated, let's say, to Ayuz, the god of pain and oppression, you can think of some huge black tower surrounded by moats and high walls. Everything about this building just, evokes majesty, strength, fear, and whatnot. But it also evokes a little bit of overcompensating. And you can play this up with the followers of this god who strut around town, pushing defenseless people out of the way and whatnot, but then crumble against the divine radiance of the power of good. Because here's the thing about evil. What it fears the most is this collective power of good, right? Because evil doesn't really bond themselves together. They can't trust each other, whereas the, altruistic good always have this advantage, and such that the evil ones always feel under threat. And think about, like, here in the United States, we have these cults who will gather together in some remote area and build a compound, right? And they have these fortified buildings, and then they make a fence with razor wire on top, and they have armed guards, and they've basically built a prison for themselves. They are in fear of the outside world. And if the government's interested in them, they don't have to put them in prison. They're already there. They just need a couple guys in a van to sit out front and watch them. So use that sense of paranoia and compensation and fear in the architecture of the evil cults that you build in your world. So if it's a forbidden cult in some city, it's going to be in a sewer or some forgotten dungeon or something. Or if it's in a remote area, it's in a lonely moor. And that miserable and bleak environment and architecture reflects the misery of this god and its cult. All right, so you've got your main god and you've got architecture. You're thinking, I'm going to reflect the ethos and the nature of the followers of this god in the architecture. Do you have to do one for every god on your list? I'd say no. First of all, you got enough things to do trying to create your own homebrewed world. So you kind of have a standard set of architecture for, you just scale it for the Pelor or whatever your common god is. Like I said, I like the simple one because I don't have to do that. And then think of a few more, maybe 2 for each city or settlement, and I always use a frontier world in mind, so I don't have that many. And so your number one thing is if you have a cleric who's a player character, so I've got one Foltus, the god of light, a player character who worships that god. So I have this tower, this gleaming tower that's painted. It reflects the light, and it especially reflects the moonlight, and it's at the highest point in town so everyone can see it. And then I have one for basically got Cord, the god of sports and athletics, and it's basically like a fitness center, right? All of the adherents are constantly working out and whatnot. And then I have Weejaz, the god of death and magic. And basically this is all underground. The temple is all underground, except it has like a bank vault structure on top that you enter in through. And then I'll just create if I have a new player character that has another god, I will create a new structure for it. Again, looking at the ethos, what it represents, what are its domains in the world, and then go from there. And this takes us to a structure that I really like to create, especially for sort of minor gods, out of the way things, which are shrines. And these could be very simple structure. You have maybe a platform for offerings, a roof with no walls kind of thing, just to shade from the rain or the sunshine. Maybe a simple hut for the lone priest that maintains the shrine and basically lives off the offerings that people give. So a very common one is whatever traveler god you have in your world along roadways and whatnot. There's a travel god shrine, and then people passing by will, he'll have water for them or whatever for the horses, but they'll give a few offerings to the god of travel, right? So that they don't get waylaid and whatnot. And the thing is, you might have some bandits or something that are like, hey, I'm going to rob these people. And, for just a few copper or silver or whatever. And the legends is sort of like the knights that killed Thomas Becket. People have legends of these bandits did this, and then one by one they came to a horrific fate. Whether or not it's really happened, it is considered very taboo to harm one of these travel temples because even bandits have to travel. And as I say, the great thing about these shrines is they're very easy to plug into places, and they introduce gods to the players. So let's say a noble has a shrine to a god of knowledge in their library within their vast keep, right? And they have this priest who, maintains this library. Now the players need information, they can go here. Perhaps they have to perform a function. The priest needs a rare manuscript, and if the players go get that, they'll give them some information. You could have a very simple shrine to what I always have in my worlds as the most powerful god, which is that of fate and destiny. And it could be right alongside a graveyard in the major city where you have huge mausoleums that the richest people have built. And then you have gravestones for some of the merchants and artisans of the town. And then you have unmarked graves for all the wretched people or whatever. But they're all in the same place. Because in the end, after death, all are equal. And people will go to this shrine and make an offering to fate itself, to the, old woman who seems to have maintained this shrine for as long as anyone can remember. Cool. Because the worship and impact of gods is central to the life of these sentient creatures in an RPG fantasy world, and it should be reflected in, the way these temples are situated in your homebrewed world. Because just as cathedrals, dominated the skyline of medieval cities, so too with these temples. And just as truth in the real world is often found, in some far-off remote place, not in the huge palaces of knowledge, so too might be some secret to the very existence of the material plane be hidden away in some forgotten tiny shrine in the middle of nowhere. Because just as humans are above all else greedy, the motivations of the gods are above all else inscrutable. So the thing is, it can be great fun to create some huge, temple to the god of industry and zeal, with gold inlaid statuary and marble floors, and a beautiful giant central church with some silver-tongued priest who, every week lectures to the various nobles who compete with one another to sit in the front pew and listen to him. And just as fun to create one to the goddess of nature, in some beautiful remote forest in the center of a gnarled tree. Here is this little shrine with a very old halfling who seems to be always shrouded in his pipeweed, right, as he presides over this simple shrine. But here's the thing. Which would be the place that fate would decide to place clues to some magic item or some invocation or some ancient god through which the very fate of the material plane hangs? I think I know. Because remember, the simple hobbits were the only creatures of Middle-earth that were capable of taking the Ring of Power back to Mount Doom to have it destroyed. And I think this was more than just Tolkien using this for narrative reasons or for some kind of allegory or whatever. Because what I think is, above all else, the gods have a very highly developed sense of humor. So hopefully that was helpful for you to build temples in your homebrewed world. And if you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for more. Leave some comments. Love to hear about temples you've created. But most importantly, keep playing an RPG game, whichever one you prefer, and tell somebody else about it.